Again, I don't know if I buy the idea of a taxidermy bear with an endoskeleton inside of it. That's crazy. But
ladies, gentlemen, and those with the good sense to do away with the whole notion, I welcome you to the premier audio medium for all your Fazbear entertainment needs, the Freddy Fazbear Pizza Podcast. Note, FFPP is not responsible for any loss of appetite, disinterest, dismemberment, or other legally classified statuses. So strap in and enjoy.
hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Freddy Fazbear Pizza Podcast. I'm your host, The Toast, Rye Toast, to talk about Five Nights at Freddy's, like we always do. I'm a little under the weather, as you can tell. God bless. But I wanted to get this recording out as soon as I could, because I like to record before I write. And it's Sunday, because I've been putting it off, hoping that the sickness would go away. And like last time, it hasn't. So here we are. I don't have a specific topic pointed out, but we have two questions on the Patreon that I kind of wanted to combine and make today's topic about. Once again, if you haven't seen the last couple episodes, I will now be taking questions from Patreon first and then going to the email. So we'll still, if you want your questions answered via the email, there's still the Freddy Fazbear Pizza Podcast at gmail.com. That's not going away. That's still going to be utilized. I'm just prioritizing the Patreon questions as a way to give thanks back. So our first two questions, we'll go for the first one first, is from Web Spectre. Hey, Rye, I have a theory that Gregory is actually the Mimic to some degree. Not only does he hide in a Freddy like a suit, just like the Mimic does with mascots, he also takes pieces from the animatronics and puts them on Freddy, similar to what the Mimic does at Proto Freddy's. I would also think that would explain why Gregory's eyes go static and why he's good at hacking for a random kid. I also feel that the Mex's program might have been making the Mimic appear more human somehow, and when Glamrock Freddy got Roxy's eyes, it allowed him to bypass Mexus and see the real Gregory for the first time, which is why he says, "You're broken." What are your thoughts on this? Well, first of all, thank you for your question. It's definitely an interesting take. I hesitate to say that Gregory is the Mimic. And, there's different logic traps, there's different evidences that you can bring up, but I feel like there's one fairly irrefutable point that makes it so you just don't have to go into that conversation at all. And that's what we see at the end of Ruin. So when we meet the Mimic at the end of Ruin, we get that encounter where the Mimic throws the walkie-talkie at Cassie and then says, "I'm Gregory," stands up, "I'm Gregory," like that moment, right, where it's revealed that the Gregory we'd been talking to the whole time is the Mimic. It's what happens immediately after that for me cements it that Gregory cannot be the Mimic. The Mimic goes to attack us, Roxy stalls it, we run, we get one room out and the fight is still happening, we can hear the fight in the background. And then Gregory calls us on our Roxy talkie and is like, "I've finally got through to you. I've been trying to reach a hold of you all night. Where are you? You were not supposed to go to the Pizzaplex. I'm so sorry you're there." It's like that whole spiel. And then, immediately after that, it's Gregory giving us directions while we run through the cave until we get to the elevator. If Gregory is the Mimic, for this to work, the moment we left the room, the Mimic would have had to pick the walkie-talkie back up, and while fighting Roxy on one hand, calling us on the other and pretending to be Gregory again. That's already enough for me to say that doesn't make any sense. This cannot be Gregory. Gregory and the Mimic are two separate entities. But even if you want to give the benefit of the doubt that somehow the Mimic can one-hand Roxy and call us, and we don't hear any of the fighting noises, immediately after that conversation, the Mimic throws a forklift, hops down, we see it in front of us, and there's nothing in its hands, and Gregory is still on the walkie saying, "Run, follow my instructions." So, that we are visually seeing the Mimic in front of us and audibly hearing Gregory talk to us. Because of that, specifically, I don't think that that Gregory can literally be, the Mimic wearing a human suit. I just don't think it makes sense. And without that piece, without that point of evidence, there are arguments to be made, right? We know that Vanessa was looking up realistic human masks. We know that there's no good explanation for where Gregory came from. There are arguments to be made there, but because of that moment at the end of Ruin, I think Gregory is the Mimic, is fairly dead in the water. So why am I combining two questions? Because there's this, which has a lot of interesting points to talk about, but with a more believable explanation in my opinion, in the next question. Our next question coming from Moose Guy. I think it would make sense if Gregory got possessed by the Mimic 1 virus the same way that Vanessa/Vanny threw glitchy tapes, but where he differs is it wasn't cassette tapes, but VHS tapes. I think this is due to the teasers before Security Breach, the Freddy and Friends on Tour show. In them, we see glitches, and if you put them all together, you see a picture of Glitchtrap. That's a huge parallel to Vanessa/Help Wanted gameplay, where you collect glitchy cassette tapes, and when you get more and more, you see Glitchtrap. Another point of minor evidence I like is the Doggo Steelwool interview before Security Breach. When asked about the Freddy and Friends on Tour cartoons, he says that if you watch those, you're already playing Security Breach. If you look at it as you play as Gregory in Security Breach, so if you're already playing it when you watch them, then the person watching should be Gregory too. That's a really interesting concept. So, to wrap these together into one large question, it is, in a post-Sequel to the Mimic world, what exactly is the relationship between Gregory and the Mimic? And I think it leans into the Dr. Rabbit explanation that a lot of us have been saying since GGY. The idea that before the events of Security Breach, Gregory was under the influence of the Mimic, much like Vanessa/Vanny. Now, it's more accurate, I guess, to say he was under the effects of Glitchtrap, but in a post-Sequel to the Mimic world, we can pretty confidently say that Glitchtrap is some sort of manifestation of the Mimic. So, all this to say, the idea that it was the Freddy and Friends on tour show that turned Gregory into Dr. Rabbit, I think is pretty valid, especially if we try to take a moment to consider where he could have been watching this. So when we looked at the teasers, if I remember correctly, now it's been a long time, but I want to say that they were just like in a website. They weren't like set dressing anywhere specific. So I looked on the wiki. I couldn't get any like super conclusive answers, but I'm pretty sure it was just the video and maybe like some website set dressing, not like a physical location. But I was thinking about it, right? These teasers did a lot. They showed us new characters. They showed us the Freddy and Friends show. They showed us that Glitchtrap thing. They also had the cipher that we needed to decode the triangle puzzle in the sister location living room, secret room in Security Breach proper, right? That room that only shows up when you take a picture of it. It's where you play the retro CDs. It's got the chair and the TV, with the TV playing Freddy and Friends on Tour on repeat. I think it's really interesting. The idea of how Gregory was turned to be, Dr. Rabbit. After VIP came out, my initial thoughts was, oh, it's VR again, but this time it's the AR mask. It's this mask that, like, if you wear it, you can get higher scores on arcade machines and you can play more games. And using that, Vanessa tricked Gregory until eventually his mind was taken over. That's possible. I'm not going to discount that. But instead of using, a choose your own adventure book with dubious canonicity as evidence, we can just use the games themselves. In a post-Sequel to the Mimic world, knowing about the kind of things that the Mimic would like to do, the idea that the Mimic influenced the creation of this sister location room that is, from its memory data bank, and it's just a TV, just a room with a TV and a chair, The idea that Gregory was in here watching Freddy and Friends and slowly getting his mind taken over by Glitchtrap is really compelling. Because this room is important. It's not only so very hidden, but also it has the retro CD player, the machine in this game that gives us the most information about Vanessa and Gregory, the two victims that were turned by Glitchtrap, right? Now, again, we don't know for certain that patient 42, I believe it was 42, is Gregory. Like, probably, right? Like, one of them's Vanessa, and the other one is someone who's described in a childlike fashion who is a hacker and, was conversing with a rabbit on security cameras. and seems to be a little giddy about killing people. It's basically directly described as Dr. Rabbit. And then we get the story GGY, in which Dr. Rabbit is a kid named Greg who's secretly killing school therapists. And the patient 42 is implied to be secretly killing the therapists. Like, it's very, in a post GGY world, it's almost guaranteed that the unnamed patient in the retro CDs is Gregory. Like, it makes the most sense. So the idea that, you know, Gregory at some point was scooped up by Vanessa for not having anybody to look after him, right? Because we don't know that Gregory doesn't have a family. But the fact that he escapes the Pizzaplex and his first place of refuge is a cardboard box, not great look for him. On top of the fact that in GGY, he recently moved to the area. So even if he was like a normal kid, he might have ran away to become this character. But it does make the most sense that he's kind of like this kid who sneaks around the Pizzaplex and, you know, he basically kind of semi-lives there. And once Vanessa clocks that this kid is basically living at the Pizzaplex, Vanny's like, oh, we got a new recruit. No one's going to look up after him, you know? So then they lock him in this room that the only thing to do is watch Freddy and Friends on tour, which slowly, they probably don't even have to, like, kidnap him. They're probably just like, hey, I mean, listen to the way Vanessa talks to Gregory at the end of the game. There's that line that we all kind of, like, semi-make jokes about, because, like, hey, why she say it like that? But there's that line where it's, Gregory, I think you deserve a reward. Right? That line? It's so purposeful, and it's so highlighted. I would not doubt if that's supposed to be a callback to something we didn't know about. Imagine you're Vanessa / Vanny. This is a Vanny thing. Imagine you're Vanny, and you see this kid who basically lives at the Pizzaplex. He constantly gets these high scores. He's sneaking around after hours. And then you need a new recruit. You look at him, and you're like, how do I get this kid to be in line under Glitch Trap? I know. You see him winning a bunch of arcade machines, and then you and your mascot, your fun mascot suit, roll up, and it's like, wow, you're really good at these arcade machines. You keep getting all the high scores. I think you deserve a reward. Follow me. And you lead him into a back room, and instead of William Afton killing, it's you lead him into the back room of this sister location living room looking place. And you go, hey, this is some, like, very archived, hard to find Freddy and Friends on tour cartoons. I'm going to leave you here. Here's the remote. Watch them as much as you want. Enjoy. You know, this is your reward for being such a good Freddy's fan. And then closes the door. Maybe even locks it behind her. The hope is after watching all of them, his mind is taken over by Glitch Trap. And I think that's worthwhile. Especially because of the code. Now, I don't think it necessarily makes sense for Gregory to write the code because it's written so cryptically and oldly. It's written like an old man writes. It's very strange. But disregarding what the code says, logically, I think it does make sense for Gregory to write the code in this explanation. Because what is happening if not the storyteller? A different story from Tales from the Pizzaplex where essentially the Mimic AI is put into this massive fake Boabab tree in the Pizzaplex. And, you know, Mr. Burroughs, the CEO at the time, was like, yeah, it's just going to run all of the story programming of all the animatronics, and we can fire our creative team. But wouldn't you know it, the one person they keep is the director of the creative team, who is, you might recognize the name, Edwin Murray, much older and much later in life. And Edwin Murray's like, this is fucked. They can't replace the creative team with some AI. That sucks. So then he like sneaks around and he notices that the AI is housed inside of a white tiger head. And he immediately has a PTSD flashback. He's like, oh God, oh no, it can't be. And so he sneaks inside the tree, closes it in after him. He delves into the computer of the storyteller, and lo and behold, it is the Mimic1.exe program. It's like, oh, that's a problem. So Edwin knows he can't just like dismantle it. That's not going to work. So he's just trying his best to like fix it by coding. And he keeps going day after day, sneaking in, trying to like code out the issues with the Mimic One to hopefully save any lives. But all the while, the Mimic One program is making the Pizzaplex a horrible place. The animatronics are acting strange and like extreme versions of themselves. Things are starting to break down. Freddy's this like crybaby drama queen. It's really funny. And all the while, Edwin's trying to fix it. Mr. Burrows notices that Edwin's been sneaking into the storyteller tree. So he has this moment of like, oh, it's being sabotaged by Edwin. This is all his fault. I know. I'll scare him straight. I'll lock him in the baobab tree, and eventually he'll have to call for help. And then he'll get caught, and we can blame it all on him, fire him, persecute him, and then I can have a working storyteller tree. So I'll just lock him in, and then once he's locked in, he'll have to call for help. And then like 3 days go by. And no, he never called for help. He's like, what the hell? Okay, well, I don't want him to like be like Mr. Burrows does, like, he has to be in there. It kind of turns into like a Telltale Heart situation where he's like, his conscience and guilt is overwhelming him of like, why isn't he called for help? Why isn't he called for help? So eventually Mr. Burrows is like, fine, fuck it. He unlocks it. He opens the door. He goes inside. He finds a dead Edwin Murray on the ground who seems to have suffocated inside the baobab tree. And it's like in that moment where he's like looking around and he sees that the paperwork is covered in strange geometric patterns that don't quite make sense over and over and over again. And as he goes to leave, the door locks behind him and he tries to scream out and bang for help. And once you know it, it's a soundproof container. So maybe Edwin was calling for help. Nobody knows. Mr. Burrows suffocates too. That would be one thing. The idea of like, oh, somebody getting locked in a room that contains the mimic who goes crazy and starts writing in geometric code. That's already like, like that's sirens, because that's what I'm describing. But it goes a little bit further, because in the story now, I want to make sure I'm not misremembering. I'm going to grab the book to double check. All right, I can't find it. I just dug for like 5 minutes. If anyone can find it, or if I'm just crazy here, I swear that in the story, the mimic, in the Tales of the Pizzaplex story, the mimic, David and the mimic communicate with this, like, they make up a language of like shapes and like triangles and stuff. I was thinking that was made back to there. Maybe I'm Mandela affecting it. I swear that was in there. But if that is, that's another point to this idea. The idea that, like, as Gregory's mind is being taken over by the mimic, he begins writing in this code that the mimic and David used to share. I wouldn't even doubt because if the Glitchtrap is the mimic and the mimic is trying to take over Gregory's mind, the idea of in communicating to Gregory through these cassette tapes, the triangle code stuff starts leaking in, which is where we get, the key to solve that code that's in the room, because the mimic is like, oh, if I'm communicating with a small boy, the last time I did this, we made a little secret language. Let's do that again, So, like, I think it's very, very possible. But I can't find the evidence, so I don't even know if it's in that book. Let me know if that's a great point. It's an amazing piece of evidence if it's real. I could just be making up some bullshit. Right now, my source is it came to me in a dream, so help me out with that one. But all this to say, the idea that Gregory was turned in this room, I think, is really, really compelling. And then, Vanessa just had to check on him in like a day or so, open the room, and hey, Dr. Abbott's ready to help. I think that has a lot of merit. And I've always been, ever since GGY especially, but even before then to a certain extent, I've always been a proponent of Gregory was helping Glitchtrap before Security Breach. It just is the thing that explains Gregory the best. And, in a post-GGY, especially post-Escape the Pizzaplex world, that's a very easy theory to make, because it seems more and more that, like, he was a bad guy turned good. And I would argue that the moment of the reason Security Breach happens is because Gregory snaps out of it as Glamrock Freddy snaps out of it. Now we have these two who are the breach in Burntrap's security, I think it makes the most sense that way. And to give him this origin specifically, I do like a lot. And I've heard people say, like, what about Balloon World? And I get that, but think on the fact that Vanessa turning into Vanny theoretically was done with the cassette tapes and Help Wanted, not with Princess Quest. Princess Quest is the lock, but the door was always something else. So if anything, this is then still consistent with that logic, that the cassette tapes are the door in which Gregory's mind was stolen, and Balloon World is the lock on that door. So yeah, there is a lot of looking back at Gregory's character post Secret of the Mimic. I think there's a lot of compelling connections to the Mimic you can make that better explain where Dr. Rabbit came from in the first place. And to pile on top of that, this is already good. I can't wait to see the next sequential game in the timeline to see where Gregory is now. I think it's most likely that Gregory, Vanessa, and Freddy's head make it out. I think good Princess Quest ending is the likely security breach ending. So theoretically, the next game we see Gregory, it's Gregory, Vanessa, and Freddy's head working against the Mimic. Possibly with Edwin in tow. We've talked about that possibility. I still don't know if I fully subscribe to it, but it does make sense. But the idea that Gregory is now going to fully be the hero and has to save Cassie as to what's been done to her, I think that really tracks. Especially because, hey, I don't think FNAF is like a dark and depressing timeline the more you look into it, but the mainline games, I think they do a good job of not dwelling on the child death of it all. It's where a lot of like FNAF fan works kind of miss the mark, where they put a lot of focus on the death of these kids, which, like, in some aspects, yes, it's a horror franchise, sure, but I think Scott does a very good job of avoiding the unnecessary tragedy or gratuitousness of that topic. All this to say, because of that, I don't think Cassie's dead. I think it'd be kind of fucked to give us a whole game where we learn the entire family lineage and like her history, her connection to Gregory and to her dad. Like, this whole game focused on Cassie and telling us so much about her. Frankly, more than we learn about Gregory in spades. Just to have her die at the end of the game, and then the next game is us like trying to rescue her and she's already dead. Like, that sucks. I don't think they're going that direction. I think it makes much more sense for her mind to be taken over. All this to say, the question is then how? And I think it's the AR mask, and maybe that's where I got confused in my VIP reading, where I was like, oh, VIP shows us there are these AR helmets you can wear throughout the Pizzaplex that, the Mimic can dwell inside of. And maybe that's how Gregory was turned. But maybe this is the game saying, no, Gregory was turned with those Freddy on Friends tour tapes, and the mask is for Cassie. And that does make a lot of sense. And those are our three like main characters who have been mind controlled at one point by the Mimic. But yeah, WebSpectre and Moose Guy, thank you for your questions, and thank you for the continued support. That's very kind of you. But we will move on to some email questions. Once again, if you want your questions answered on the podcast, feel free to send them to Freddy Fazbear Pizza Podcast at gmail.com. It's in the description to copy and paste because it is a pain to type out. Our first question comes from Colin, him. I think Dreadbear was the original Fredbear. Literally. Because if Fredbear was a real bear in the Fredbear Sing and Show poster, and people loved the bear, and when the bear died, William didn't want a new bear because he's cheap and Fredbear Sing and Show is a family business, so William did a hacked taxidermy job and put it on an endoskeleton, forgot about it, maybe it's haunted by the original Fredbear. I kind of like this concept a lot. I don't know how much I fuck with it, but the idea that like Dreadbear is this like rumor that has resurfaced recently when they made the Fall Fest themed things in recent Fazbear stuff, like Ennard, who is now a marketable character. Dreadbear came about because after Fredbear Sing and Show, the real bear died, and William just like stitched that body onto an endoskeleton and tried it. That's really funny. And also, it kind of lines up with a lot of stuff. because like consider the idea, right? Like you said, William's cheap. One, if the Mimic at any point learned about this, which again, it seems like the Mimic just knows the entire history of Fazbear's at this point, and the Mimic is in part of the sister location coding, which, you know, there's a lot of arguments for that. I think I've talked about it on the podcast, if not a main channel video at this point. The idea that, like, the sister location robots are likely built from Mimic code at some point. I wonder if that's where they got the plan to escape the bunker. You know, the idea of, like, the Mimic is like, I need a way to get past these guards and security cameras and exit this facility. Well, we know we can pilot an organic being as long as we're put into their body. Let's scoop out somebody in the scooper and pilot their human body out of here. You know, like it kind of starts to line up with a lot of stuff, and not to mention, you know, Dreadbear's whole vibe of being this like Frankensteinian amalgamation creature that it just popped up out of nowhere and is seemingly incredibly important. Because like consider in the Curse of Dreadbear DLC lobby, Dreadbear exits the lake and walks into the barn. And like, okay, sure, that's just kind of a creepy thing. You can write it off as just a creepy thing. But that lake is so damn important because that lake shows up in Ruin. You know, we see it in the caves. That lake is likely the Old Man Consequences lake for several reasons. We don't super... It's the podcast. We have time to get into it. So, like, I've made the connection before that that lake is the Old Man Consequences lake because it's a lake surrounded by, you know, like these evergreen / dying trees. And it's a lake that's near the FNAF 4 house. It's a lake that's near Fall Fest. Add all this on to the fact that in Midnight Motorist, we see the FNAF 4 house is surrounded by these same kind of trees. And then add on to that in Secret of the Mimic, now that we see where the FNAF 4 house eventually ends up, where Murray's Manor is, similarly surrounded by these kinds of trees. And wouldn't you know it, there is a big lake on that property. So, like, it just keeps lining up that, like, if you look at Midnight Motorist as a map, to the left would be this lake. So this lake, which has been surrounded this area, it's been in this area for the longest time. It's dripped down to be near the FNAF 6 pizzeria. And, you know, the metaphors associated with that. The idea that Dreadbear exits the lake and then walks into the barn representative of Fall Fest, that's huge if the Dreadbear is a representation of the Mimic. You know, the idea of like an endoskeleton inside of a living thing. No, that's really interesting. Again, I don't know if I buy the idea of a taxidermy bear with an endoskeleton inside of it. That's crazy. But there are a lot of connections. So, like, you're right to bring it up because there are so many connections you can make with that concept. It's crazy. So thank you for your question. Our next one comes from Woof Woof, they them. Whatever happened to Phone Dude from FNAF 3 after we hear him talking about finding old training tapes and finding a real one? We never really hear from him again. I don't know, I'm curious as to what happened to the guy and your thoughts on it. To be honest, not much. Wait, did I do this question already? I feel like maybe I've done this question already. I'm sick. My mind is not a steel trap. My mind is a wet mouse trap that things can get through quite easily. But hey, if I did it before, pretend I didn't. I wanted to. I'm gonna be very brief about it anyway. The idea that I think Phone Dude just kind of fucked off. I don't think he really cares about the franchise. I think he thought it was a fun idea and he's trying to make a quick buck. And then once everything burned down, he went, "Damn, that sucks," and he moved on. I really don't think he matters that much in the grand scheme of things. He's more of a means to an end. Frankly, people don't like this. I think the current Fazbear CEO is very similar to FNAF 3 Phone Dude in that sense. That I do genuinely think, you know, at some point it seems like the Fazbear CEO role was taken over by Glitchtrap digitally. You know, like the system is making choices, the emails are being sent out, and it's like basically pretending to be the CEO. But I think like before Glitchtrap does that, it's just like a guy. It's just like a dumb guy trying to cut corners. So like we see in the books where it's Mr. Burrows, who's just like this rich dumb kid who's like, I bet I can make a profit spinning this company up. So I genuinely don't think the current Fazbear CEO matters, because I think it's just some guy who is making dumb choices and they keep going wrong. And then because of that, this grand mess has happened. And maybe he dies because of it. Maybe now Glitchtrap has taken over and no one checks up on him. I don't know. But I don't think it's that important. I feel like I've definitely done this. And for fear of I did do that question before and the rest of this sheet is questions I've done before, I'm just going to open the email and see what I see. I think we're going to open the email and we're going to see what we see. Ooh, this is fun. Interesting. So this question's from, and we'll close out on this one. This question's from Sunny He They. It's been bouncing around my mind for a few weeks since watching the FNAF 2 movie, plus your theories on the movie. We technically have the culprit behind the bite of 87 now. Not the specific animatronic, but the culprit behind the bite being the puppet. If we go off the logic that she controls all the toys and the wizards, I think that would solve half the question regarding the bite. Would love to hear your take on this, and maybe if I missed anything. That's really interesting. The idea that, like, the bite of 87 was not an accident, but a conscious choice by Charlotte, who's controlling the animatronics. That's really interesting. I think that gives credence to the idea that the bite of 87 happened to a night guard. I think the bite of 87 is much more similar to what we hear described in the week before, where like some guard was messing with one of the animatronics and it malfunctioned. But the idea that like we know that Charlotte was trying to stop William Afton, was guiding animatronics around. We see in Save Them, Charlotte is actively guiding animatronics around to stop William Afton. So if the restaurant opened after Save Them, the bite of 87 could have been retribution. The idea that like Charlotte was trying to stop William Afton, he killed the kids anyway, they clean it up, they reopen the next day, and then the next night guard comes in, and it's not William Afton, it's some guy. But they don't know that. Their animatronics are doing their best. And it's some guy in a night guard outfit who looks kind of like William Afton. And Charlotte's like, he's back, we gotta get him now. And sicks one of the animatronics on him, bite of 87. That's not like that. There's a decent logic behind that. I could totally see that. Like, is that what happened? We don't know. I don't think we're ever gonna have a solid answer on the bite of 87. But I think this is my second most likely option now, because I think my most likely option now is Withered Foxy. I agree that Toy Chico was kind of set up to be the bite of 87 person, but I do think the week before gives us near irrefutable evidence for Withered Foxy. I think it makes too much sense. But if it ain't Withered Foxy, the idea that it's Charlotte trying to get back at William, assuming the new night guard is William Afton, I like that a lot. I think there's a lot of merit there. I think it makes a lot of sense. Even if it's just explaining why it's Jeremy Fitzgerald and Fritz Smith, right? If Jeremy Fitzgerald is the victim here, and the Save Them DCI happens on like Thursday, and we get bite of 87 on Friday, and then Fritz Smith comes in on Saturday, that lines up really well. Especially, right, if William was trying to get a rise out of the animatronics to see if any possession has occurred, and then, he does the DCI, he leaves, and then he hears that the next night guard that came in got killed by an animatronic, he's not going back there. Shit, okay, let me grab Michael Afton. Hey, son, you're expendable. Go check out this location. Like, that kind of makes a lot of sense. No, maybe I like this more. And it could still be Withered Foxy. We don't know. But the idea that the bite specifically happened because Charlotte was like, we're not playing around anymore. He's killing kids. We need to take him out now. I kind of fuck with it. I kind of like it a lot. And maybe Michael survived because they killed someone and thought they did it. And was like, oh, that's not William. That's fine. Like, I don't know. I like it a lot. I kind of want to think about that some more. But I'm going to think about it off of the podcast. If you have any questions you want to answer on the podcast, if you want them answered with priority, you can send them in the Patreon. But if you want them answered at all, you can send them into Freddy Fazbear Pizza Podcast at gmail.com. It's a description and copy and paste. It's a pain to type out. And until next time, as always, you've been watching the Freddy Fazbear Pizza Podcast, where the pizza abilities are endless. We hope to enjoy your future patronage. Bye-bye for now.